Won't you pray with me? God, we give you thanks. We give you thanks that you have called us into relationship with you. You have called us into a place where home feels good, where home is a place that we are welcomed by you and by those that we love. God, we ask that the meditation of my lips and of all of our hearts be pleasing in your sight, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So my mom answered the call into ministry when I was in 7th grade, 6th or 7th grade. And she sat my brother and I down and said, what are the things that make you the most nervous, or what is something that I can make sure that I do to make sure that you are the most on board with this? And both Dylan and I were both like, well, who are we to stand in the way of God, right? But she said, okay, yeah, we're on board, we're all in that agreement, but what is one thing that I can do to make sure that you are the most comfortable? And my brother and I grew up in a community where school was from kindergarten to 12th grade. And so the one thing that we both kind of asked for was, we'd really like to graduate from this school that we started in. And so if there is any way that we would not have to move houses throughout this process, that would be super great for us. And so my mom did what she had to do to make sure that we didn't have to move houses. And some people will say that it was because we wanted to go to school at the place that we started, but I think deeper, as I reflect on it more, it was I didn't want to have to learn a new home and then leave for college, right? Because by the time my mom did end up moving houses, my brother was a senior in high school. So I had already graduated and moved on. And so that was the one thing that we had asked her for, and that was the one thing that she made happen for us. And my parents still own the house that we grew up in. So even when I go home, right, it still feels like a new house because I live in a different home now, but I still have to relearn, and they've rearranged, and so it's a completely different house than the one that I left, but it's still the house that I grew up in. There's a song by Philip Phillips called Home. It was the theme song for the USA Women's Olympic Gymnastic Team in 2012, and it has been used in almost every TV commercial in that age for a while. They say that Philip didn't like it at first, and he didn't want to sing it, mostly because it wasn't his song, and he prefers the ones he writes himself, supposedly. But he must have made his peace with this one. It has become his signature song. He probably will never do a concert and not sing Home because his fans might demand their money back. And if you have never heard the song Home by Philip Phillips, I encourage you to look it up when you get home because it is a good one. And it is a good reminder of what home, the feeling of home is. It became a phenomenon. In an uncertain age, singing about home captured everyone's attention. It touched something deep within the people who latched onto it. Some longing, some hope that almost goes beyond words. Home, family roots, settling down, putting your feet up. Make yourself at home. I don't know if you noticed last week, Elba took her boots off when she first got here, and it was not a fight that I wanted to fight with her to keep her shoes on in the sanctuary. And if any of you had asked me about it, which nobody did, so I'll tell you what I would have told you, I am grateful that she feels at home in this space. I am grateful that she is making herself at home by taking her shoes off. Because that means she's comfortable. But it's funny how Jesus seems so against this whole idea of home. You'd think that he would be in favor of it, of helping us get home, of finding where we belong, finding where we relate or fit in or are known. Isn't he? Isn't that what this faith thing is all about? Finding ourselves and arriving at home at last? Well, you'd think so. And he does do all those things with all those things for us, but his description of that is different from ours. His methodology of finding seems almost like losing. His depiction of arriving sounds more like journeying. We want to be settlers, and he wants us to be pilgrims. Sometimes, even home isn't home. The unreachable destination, the unrealized dream, the undiscovered country. Are we supposed to feel sorry for him with that foxes and birds thing we heard in the gospel reading this morning? Are we supposed to leave our parents to deal with their own end-of-life issues? Are we really just supposed to slip away rudely as though the people who know us best aren't important enough to even bid them farewell? You know, this thing where Jesus sets his face to Jerusalem can be a real pain in the associations. The Samaritans didn't want to deal with him because he was looking onward. It ticked off the disciples too. They wanted to call down fire to burn them all up. Everyone seems to be a bit on edge in the chapter from the Gospel of Luke that we read this morning. It's like everyone just needs to go home. Go home and settle down. Go home and calm yourself. Maybe if Jesus just lightened up a little bit. We don't like the edge that Jesus puts on things at times. We don't like the demand part of the faith, the commitment part. We like the grace part, and we often interpret that as anything goes as long as your heart is in the right place. We like the be like little children command rather than the be ye perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect one. That must have been a bad day for Jesus. The folks who came alongside him must have felt like they caught Jesus in a bad mood on a bad day. Understandable, really, since he was heading to Jerusalem to die a difficult death. So we can forgive his curt responses, his heavy-handed demands. He was a man without a home, so he was anxious to get back to where he belonged, back into the arms of the Father. On the other hand, maybe he wasn't just short-tempered. Maybe he wasn't just caught in a bad moment. Maybe he knows something he desperately wants us to know. And that is that home is never found by standing still, or even less by going back. Who said that you can't go home again? It might as well have been Jesus. It is never back there. Home is never found through nostalgia, through wishing that it was like the good old days and that never were, except in our fractured memories. It's like I mentioned in the story that I shared that even when I go home to the place where I grew up, it's different than even I remember it from my teen years. The other thing that Jesus wants to tell us here is that home isn't as a place as much as it's a relationship. The first eager follower would have been better to have simply said, I will follow you. By adding in the wherever you go, it became about the destination and not about the journey. It became about a place and not about the commitment to follow the Word made flesh. The other two eager followers that we heard about in the gospel this morning, they wanted a both and. They wanted to follow, but they wanted to stay behind at the same time. They wanted to divide their focus a little bit here and a little bit there. I want to follow you, Jesus, and I will follow you, but there are responsibilities that I have to take care of. And so as soon as I get my life in order, I will be back and ready to go. I've got lots of relationships, and as soon as I get them in line, I'll be back. I wonder if the second follower had simply said, "Yes, I will follow you," if Jesus would have sent him back to care for his Father. Having made the commitment to be in relationship with Christ, then all our other relationships and responsibilities become even more vital, even more pressing, because now it is in the light of Christ that we fulfill these other duties. It is in the light of Christ that we serve and love and create home. Home has always been a movable feast. Not this place or that place, but the accommodation created when followers journey together for a time. There is no place like it. But where is it? That might be the question that Elisha and Elijah seem to be wrestling with in our text from the Hebrew Scriptures this morning. There is something going on here, something about wandering, something about going home, but it isn't quite clear which is which. Surely, as you were listening to Cece read this morning, you can agree that there is some significant wandering going on in these verses. We start in Gilgal, head to Bethel, then over to Jericho, and then to the Jordan. That's quite a hike for a guy on his last day on earth. I read it somewhere that from Gilgal to Bethel was 7 miles. And then from Bethel to Jericho was 11 miles. And then from Jericho to Jordan was a mere 5 miles. All of which means that on Elijah's last day on earth, he wandered 23 miles. That's almost a full marathon. It's pretty amazing, right? Because if we think about it, Elijah did not have a car or a chariot or anything like that. So it's likely that he walked those 23 miles in his last 24 hours on earth. But why? Why did he do all of that journeying? Maybe it was just wandering. Or maybe he was looking for a little alone time, a little Elijah time. He did keep telling Elisha to stay behind. Some commenters say Elijah was testing Elisha to see if he would really go through with it. But I am not sure if I agree with that. It seemed like Elisha was making a pest of himself and wouldn't give Elijah space. So maybe he kept moving to try and get rid of the kid. Or maybe there was a destination in mind. Gilgal, while there are many places with that name, and we can't always be sure which is referred to here, is a place of remembering. There were standing stones set up there as a reminder of what God has done in our midst. So, from a place of remembering, Elijah headed to Bethel, the house of God. This is the place where Jacob wrestled with the angel to receive a blessing. Then Jacob named it Bethel, perhaps thinking that he wrestled in God's living room. But it was a place full of the presence of God. So from a reminder of the presence to a place where one wrestled with that presence. From here he went to Jericho. And Jericho, you will remember, is a place of victory, or walls falling down, and battles won. So, is this a place of triumph? Well, yes, but whose triumph? The story of Jericho tells us that before the march and the trumpets and the urban renewal, Joshua stands on the brink of war. not sure that he can win, but dedicated to the fight anyway. When in the dark of the night a warrior appears to him and Joshua asks what any of us would ask, friend or foe? Whose side are you on? The warrior's answer, neither. I am here as the commander of the Lord's army. Or, as one commentator has noted, the warrior said, I've not come to fight on either side. I've come to take over. And Joshua left him. Joshua falls on his face and says, what does the Lord want from me? Jericho was a sign of triumph, but it was God's triumph and not ours. So while a scene of victory, it is a victory that comes from surrender. It is pledging allegiance not to any earthly power, but the word of the Lord. So from victory out of surrender, what might be left? Where else should we wander on our last day on earth? Well, nowhere else but the Jordan. The Jordan is the river down by which we lay down our sword and shield. The Jordan is that barrier across which we look and see a band of angels coming to carry us home. The Jordan is the symbol of death and resurrection in baptism, and it is the entrance into the promised land. Elijah wandered the route of the people of God, from awareness to contention towards surrender and victory, and then came to the end in the presence of the kingdom. Friends, it is the journey of our own life in faith, and we may at times find ourselves retracing our steps, revisiting different stages on this journey, but by the grace of God and the mantle of our mentors in the faith, we will find our way in the end. We may be all over the map, but we do indeed have a destination. We're heading home, and home is where God is. Home is here, and home is not here. Home is the relationships that we build with one another, but most importantly, it's the relationship we build with God. We are brought home in the Spirit, the one who calls and the one who sends. Time to go home. Friends, I hope and pray that you have the opportunity to remember what home means for you this week. To think about the relationships that you have built, have created, that bring you a sense of safety and comfort and love and grace. That mostly you feel at home in your relationship with God. May it be so. Amen.